Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.
Welcome to Meet the Author. I'm your host, Holly McKenna, a UAlbany journalism professor and a freelance writer. Today we have Annu Subramanian joining us to discuss her book, Waiting for the Perfect Dawn. Hello and welcome, Annu.
Hello, how are you?
Good to have you to discuss your book. Your book was actually recommended to me by a friend, and I was very excited to read it, and then when I read it, I fell in love with the book. And
Thank
I thought
you.
You would be a wonderful person to bring on the show to add an international perspective to the program, because we've been talking about a lot of American issues. The first show we had done was about Vietnam, so it's always good to keep it global. I'm very interested in having worked for Reuters, very interested in international news and women's rights. So what I'd like to start with is just kind of a little background. Where you're a teacher, and
yes,
what you teach.
I teach at the Academy of Holy Names. I teach in the upper school. I teach writing, literature, especially Eastern literature. Okay. And we will be discussing Waiting for the Perfect Dawn.
Oh, good for you.
And we begin Eastern literature class next year.
So, and where did you get the idea for this book?
Well, when I was going to Union College for a Master of Arts in Teaching, I had a very good advisor, Jill Hannifan, and she encouraged me to try something along the lines of fiction rather than a thesis. She had seen some writing samples of mine. So she said, while you're writing a thesis, why don't you entertain us while informing us, you know? So I thought of women's issues, which we were discussing a lot in the diversity class. And I wanted to write about women's rights or women's issues in general in India, and as you said, how it affects the global community.
Very good. So how did you get started with the book?
I interviewed many women and men. In my family, I visited India, interviewed neighbors, aunts, uncles, and I got the idea about writing generations of women rather than focusing on the present time. So I went back to, I think, late 1890s and started writing about a family. Some I made up and some really true based on my interviews. And I didn't want her generation to end there, so I wanted her daughter to have a voice, and then she adopted a child. I wanted her to have a voice. So I went through 5 generations of women and touched a little bit on domestic violence, women's rights versus women's suppression over the ages. And then, ideally speaking, there is no perfect dawn. Still there are child marriages going on. Still there is domestic violence going on. And still there is a dowry system when a woman is trying to be foisted, on a man. And dowry is a temptation for a man to, give her a good life. But I wanted to find some hope in all this chaos. Although there is no perfect dawn, I want my readers to know that communities can change traditions that are not healthy. So the readers will find the end a little interesting, I should say. So that's where I got the idea. And so far, the reader's response has been very encouraging.
Very good. This is your first published book.
This is my first published book.
What were your other other books that you've written?
I have written some collection of poetry, lots of short stories.
Love them.
In fact, in my next, I'm working on 2 different manuscripts right now. One is about, it's a full-length novel on human trafficking, especially how human beings are used by terrorists. And I'm weaving a fiction that is happening partly here in the United States and partly in India. And my other manuscript is a collection of short stories. Each story is introduced by a pair of earrings, actually. The earrings, my daughter wrote a story from the perspective of a earring, a wedding earring, actually. So the earring is introducing 9 different gems, which are very popular in India, that go on women's earrings.
Oh, okay.
And each gem has a story to tell. So I'm writing
Oh, that sounds really,
something like that.
really rich and good.
Right. And 1 or 2 stories I wrote maybe 15 years ago, which never got published, so I'm going to include them. I think they are Jimki stories. Jimki is the name of the earring. And it keeps many secrets hidden in the gems, and each gem has a story to unfold.
So is it more in the Hindu tradition, a lot of your stories? Or
Not necessarily. Some narrated by Asian Indian women like myself, and some in the 1950s, 1930s, told by Indian women, and 1 or 2 by Italian women, because we live in such a global community. Now I have friends from all over the world, so I wanted those women to find a voice in my story, so they will all be telling a story.
Very nice.
Thank you.
Yes, the time period that you chose, 1890, that was the year, actually 1890 was the year my Cuban grandfather was born, and my grandmother, 1892, in Ireland, and they came and met in the United States. So it was it's always interesting to see what other people's lives are like in other countries. My grandmother's story wasn't quite, she wasn't married at a young age. She was abandoned in an orphanage and had to be rescued by her sister, who became an indentured servant. So it's so interesting to me, just the hardships that people have to face, and as we know today, still have to face. I mean, the fact that there's human trafficking still going on, it just seems so old-fashioned and so awful but it's so real, and those are great issues that you're bringing to the surface in the form of fiction, which more people tend to read.
Thank you.
They like to read fiction, and then if you weave in a lot of history and facts that people really remember that. So, I just lost my pen. So the women that you've written about, can you just maybe tell us a little bit about each one of them? I wrote all their names down so I remember, but Bhuvana, she's at the first woman that you introduced us to.
She's the one who is a 14-year-old girl and has an arranged marriage. And the marriage is arranged through a horoscope process. Basically, when every girl is born, a horoscope is created for her. And the same thing happens for a boy. And when the horoscope is created, there is a blemish on the day she is born. Her star has kind of a black mark. So it's very hard for her parents to find a boy for her. So finally, she ends up marrying a man who is twice her age. But some readers ask me, why does she have to marry? Why does she have to marry at any cost? Marriage is a woman's salvation. During her time, she had to be somebody's daughter, and the father is not going to be alive forever, or somebody's wife, or somebody's widow. She has no other status, position in her life. She marries him, and incidentally, the man's horoscope was modified to suit this girl's horoscope, so that he can get her money. His mother plans it that way. So she's kind of cheated into marrying him, and she has a miserable marriage. She is physically abused, verbally abused. She cannot get out of it because the society will treat her as an outcast. But when she gives birth to a baby girl, he abandons her. It's unbelievable to me, when I think about it. I wrote about it, but it is just incredible that that can happen, and the society doesn't do anything about it. That's what makes me angry.
Most societies, even America, was like that. There was such a prize put on the male child. He's the heir. So if you produce a girl, it's like, what is this?
Right.
So it's not just
No.
in Asia or Africa. Or,
So true.
It's been such a problem in history.
It has been
that
because women didn't have a voice.
Exactly.
And her father brings her home, and he keeps her with him. And he raises her daughter too, the granddaughter too. They are well off.
They're wonderful parents.
Wonderful parents.
He's a lifesaver. He's just
Yes.
he's not like the other her husband or some of the other men. He's very progressive to me. That he's really values his daughter.
Really values his daughter. He taught her the joy of reading, and he introduces her to English novels and whatnot. And so Aruna, Bhuvana's daughter, has a mind of her own. She's not at all like her mother. But the society doesn't respect her because she is a woman. She even goes out of the village to get a college degree, a teaching degree, comes back and wants to open a school. They won't let her.
Right.
They just won't let her. And Setu, Bhuvana's husband, lives in dissipation. He has spent all of his money. He marries again. But he's very poor by now. And his second wife...
He has a drug habit, though, right? What is that?
He's an alcoholic.
Yeah, okay.
He's an alcoholic, and he's a spendthrift.
Okay.
So, and his second wife controls quite a bit of money that her father gave. So he doesn't have a lot of spending money. So what he tries to do is, he tries to approach his first wife, Bhuvana. And he tells her, I'll find a husband for Aruna. Unless I give my name to your daughter, no man is going to marry her, which is true. If the father doesn't acknowledge the daughter, she's not going to get married.
Yes. She's
But then
so caught in this world.
Oh my goodness.
She's the victim, but she's constantly victimized by the society, and he seems to always be winning, and he's just so brutal, and it was very frustrating.
It's very frustrating, and I was feeling frustrated along with Aruna while I was writing it, and then he just gets greedy. He says, your father's money should all be written. I should basically be governing the property if your daughter Aruna should get a husband. And then I don't know what possesses her. They are standing by a well, and I don't know if it's an accident or willful murder. She pushes him, and he dies. And then Aruna, right now, her mother pushed a man into the well. Nobody knows why. There is no way any man is going to marry her. So she decides to change the school that she was going to run into an orphanage. And she raises many children. One of the kids is Akila. And she cannot adopt her because Akila will have no voice in the society if Aruna, a spinster, adopts her. But she raises her like a daughter. And Akila somehow makes it. She becomes a nurse, and then she has a daughter called Tara. And Tara goes around the world. They raise her in Singapore. She goes to Africa, and she comes back to India, and she's very, very smart, brilliant, but she cannot show her brilliance in her society because she has to be a housewife, no matter how brilliant she is. And so she ends up never finding even a part of the dawn that the other women are trying to find. And then we finally come to her daughter, Nina, who is a woman of a different world. She breaks tradition. She breaks many cultural shortcomings, and finally tries her best to adopt a child and find the dawn that the other women were not able to.
Yeah, now Akila her husband was good. He was very good. And I can't remember how they met. He was a widower, wasn't he?
Yes.
He was a widower with older children.
Right.
And he fell in love with her.
Yes.
And he encouraged her.
Yeah.
That was a very nice relationship that they had. And then his children really loved her like a mother. You did a great job really developing the characters.
Well, thank you.
I really felt like I knew these people while I was reading them, and so much history too. It was really interesting, and all the time period. I mean, you spanned over 100 years, and it was just amazing what you were able to get into each part. And I like books that break things up into parts instead of chapters.
Good.
It's kind of a different. The first one was she's getting married, and then each one kind of gave you a sense of what was happening next, and it was really you couldn't wait to see how it all panned out, especially for the first person, because she had such a brutal life.
Brutal life. I took a great risk in writing the way I did. There is a three-way conversation going on between the writer, the characters, and the reader. Sometimes it seems like I'm telling, and I have made my characters more or less two-dimensional to get that light versus dark effect. It's very unconventional, and that is actually a hindrance in getting a conventional publisher.
Is it? Okay.
It is, but I'm going to just stick to my narrative because the readers seem to like it, and
Absolutely.
I hope one day I find a mainstream publisher.
Yes, you had it published by iUniverse.com.
iUniverse,
which is a self-publishing, which is more and more people. I mean, people have kind of frowned on that before, and now they're like, well, you can go into a bookstore and you can see that a lot of books are published by the authors themselves. I mean, to me, there's an attitude in the publishing world, and it's just, Dr. Zeus, my pastor on Sunday, mentioned he apparently manuscripts that he'd sent in that were 27 times he was rejected, and he's a classic. So it's just sometimes it just takes somebody to take a chance on an author and realize, what were we doing? This is wonderful. So it's a lot of perseverance and frustration, but I do get annoyed that things get very pigeonholed. And what I find too with a lot of writers, Amy Tan has talked about this when she writes about Chinese Americans and Chinese women. The publisher are like, well, we already have kind of books like that. We don't need additional books. As if there's no other stories to tell, because, well, that's the Chinese story, or that's the Indian story, and it's just so one-sided that everyone has so many different stories. No matter where you come from, everyone has their own story. And to dismiss authors because, well, we already have that genre covered, because it's
just a number.
They act like they're trying to be so progressive and like, oh, we're very tolerant and we're very international, but they're not. So she talks about one of her books like that, and I just thought that was brilliant that she assessed that. And it's a wrong that they do, because they tend to really pigeonhole people. So it's just I'm a big fan of Jhumpa Lahiri, and your book reminded me of stuff that she's written.
Thank you.
She's an excellent writer with her short stories and The Namesake. She's one of my favorite authors, and when I read this, I was excited. I'm very interested in India, because it was a British colony, and now it's coming into its own. Yes. Having been colonized by the British, and that you have a lot of advantages to that because of the language and your government and just court systems and stuff, that it makes it a little bit easier to make your way into the big global market and global world, as opposed to the Chinese, who are a little bit more limited with language and so forth. So I'm a big fan of Fareed Zakaria, because he writes for Newsweek, and he's on a lot of PBS programming. Yes. And he's just very articulate, and he's written some really good books that I've read. So very interested in the Indian culture. And also just the women's rights. I mean, there's a lot of stuff there. I remember in 9th grade, I had a teacher who was had gone to India with the Peace Corps.
Oh, okay.
and he would share stories, and the whole dowry thing, and
The caste system even.
yes, the caste system. Just
That's what
shocks
happens
me.
with Raja and Akila.
Uh-huh.
They are both kind of children of an indifferent god. She's poor, orphan, he's rich,
Yeah.
but he belongs to a very low caste.
So they can't escape that. They can't
Yeah,
escape
but I
any of
think they
those.
were made for each other.
That's what was so, and you developed that romance very, very nicely.
Thank you.
It was very good, and when they finally got together, it was like, it wasn't the perfect dawn because they had
No.
so much hardship to overcome, but their relationship struck me as very, very good. And then their daughter, that she was able to make that much more steps into
Yes.
modern society.
Yeah, it's like baby steps.
Yes.
Each generation takes
Yeah. And that's
little bit of getting used to.
well, as you said, hope, that there's hope there,
There is hope.
and that's so important for people to realize in situations
Yes.
like that just
Right.
each step. I mean, we all, every country has its stories of how things
Right.
were wronged,
Mhm.
and now because of someone's persistence.
Yeah, well, two things I wanted to emphasize. One was hope, and the other is community. I think community is the glue that keeps us together.
Absolutely.
So I'm using my book. I arrange some book signings and talks, and I'm trying to get women shelters and homeless shelters involved. So I'm donating whatever money we can raise periodically to help shelters.
That's wonderful.
Thank you.
That's a great.
And
great
it's a
thing.
good way to bring the community together.
Absolutely.
And make them read something, and make them aware of what's going on in the world. And it is the world is our home. As you said, it's not Chinese or Pakistani or Indian. We all live in this world. This is our big home, and we have to take care of each other,
Absolutely.
I think.
And I love tying the reading with the charity too. I think that's a wonderful thing. Some college campuses are requiring students to read. I know the University of Vermont is asking students to read Mountains Beyond Mountains this summer, which is about Dr. Paul Farmer, who helps people with AIDS in Haiti, and that was written by Tracy Kidder, who's another favorite author of mine. But just getting people to read. Reading quality stuff and doing something good, helping
good.
raising awareness about an issue that's obviously not resolved. So it's a wonderful thing. So how are women's rights in India? Now that we have all these women that you've shared each of their stories, and Nina seems to be, although Nina had a lot of hard times because she wasn't married.
Yes.
The child, I believe, was. Excuse me. Was it a Muslim
Half
child?
Hindu,
Okay.
half Muslim.
Which
So
creates problems.
That itself
Yeah,
becomes a big
right.
problem because of the religion. A lot of women have fantastic jobs in India. They hold very good positions in banks and government establishments and so on and so forth. So you see a group of women who are doing very well, very educated. But then there is also the other side that is suppressed, and it's not able to come out of, that's kind of suppression. So that is frustrating. If a few women can do it, why not others? And so I'm trying to do research on, why some can and some cannot. And then I found out that it's the society. There are two kinds of societies in India. One is very sophisticated, very forward-thinking, let's go do what we have to do to help these women. And then there is the other society. In fact, a family member is stuck in that society. She's stuck in a bad marriage for 25 years. She cannot get out of it because of society. The community that she lives in is very Victorian still. So it is mind-boggling when you think about it. But there are a lot of women who are finding voices. And still there is child marriage. Still there is domestic violence. Still there is the dowry system and the caste system.
The caste system.
So it's a very confusing world.
How about widows that they have to throw themselves on the funeral pyre? I remember reading about that as a child, and I'm like,
Thank
oh
God.
my gosh, because my grandmother, she would have been one of those women. Her husband died years ago. She would not be here because if she was Indian, she'd have to throw herself.
Right.
Her life was over because her husband was gone, and
Right.
it just, it's things like that in society.
They have changed, thank God. But still, as I said, if a woman becomes a widow in a suppressive community, she remains a widow. She doesn't get married, and she doesn't have a status, because she's a widow. There isn't much she can do. But there are some women I know who have tried to remarry and have a better life. So I'm always so happy to see that. So there is a little bit of hope. It will take time to change things, but hopefully things will change for the better. And I believe they are changing for the better.
Okay. So what is your next project? I mean, you have these other books that sound wonderful that have to be published, and maybe if you get the mainstream publisher for this one, and then they see the other books that you've written, and say, we have a gold mine here. But is there anything you're working on right now?
I'm working on the collection of short stories.
Okay.
I think I might title that Keeper of Secrets, as the earring is the keeper of secrets, and it's going to unravel a secret, in each story. And the other one is a serious, full-length fiction. What do you think about Waiting for the Perfect Dawn being 5 short stories, or rather 4 short stories and a novella with a common thread connecting them? As a reader, do you think it works?
I don't know. I like the way you have it, the form that it's in. I really do, because they're all connected. They're all related somehow.
Yes.
So to separate them, I'm thinking about it, I'm thinking of Jhumpa's short stories. Those are people they're different characters in each one, and but yours has this common thread. I don't know. I mean, I guess it depends. It depends on the publisher or your agent that decides that maybe this would sell better if we broke it up this way or whatever. But I like the way it is right now with the parts and each story going into the next, and you see the progression of freedom for each of the women. It is always fascinating to me. I've read so many books where a lot of the women who have the least amount of status almost have the most freedom in a lot of ways. They're not so much tied to what society tells them.
Right.
Age of Innocence, The Birth of Venus, these are some books I've read recently. And the slave girls, so the girls that had no real standing were the ones that were able to leave the house without chaperone. And they were the ones carrying information between everyone, because everyone else had these images to present, to uphold. So I always found that so interesting. And Akeelah, as the orphan, had a lot more freedom in a way. I mean, she obviously had this heavy weight, but she was marrying the man she loved. It wasn't an arranged marriage.
No.
And I mean, and that's, it's also cultural differences. I mean, America is a society where people marry for love. But there's many people who marry in India, and they for arranged marriages, and they're very happy. They are very happy that it's just something that their family made for them, and they grew to love the person and so forth. So, and it's not to always, and that's the other thing, is to respect the way things are done, as long as the person's happy with the choice. And that's the thing. I mean, sometimes, we do everything great here, and it's like, well, some of the stuff we do isn't so great. And even other countries too, where in France, South America, where men have mistresses all the time.
Right.
I would not be happy with that.
No.
I'm glad. People say, America's so puritanical, and I'm like, well, I'm really kind of happy my husband doesn't want to run off with other women and still be married to me and have children with other women, and some of these other cultural things that are accepted, because everybody just wants to do their own thing and be happy. And it's like, well, what about the first wife, the mother of the children, and then you have all these other situations. So. It's just I don't know. It seems like the men always have the better part of it all, and we're always kind of fighting for the little scraps.
Yeah, I like the way you pointed out traditions. We have to respect other cultures. I really like that, because once I was having an argument with my mother about arranged marriages versus love marriages. I didn't have an arranged marriage, by the way. But then she said, keep an open mind. If love marriages are the way to go, she asked me, how come so many end up in divorces?
Yes,
and that she has a very good point. So it's not about arranged or not arranged. It's give and take, a lot of understanding and patience. It takes a lot for a
Especially
marriage to
since
work.
one of the biggest reasons why couples fight and get divorced is over money.
Yes.
And if you've got a couple that is married for love, but they have no way to support themselves, whereas if it's an arranged marriage, you're getting, there's money involved, there's stability and so forth, and like this would be a good situation for you. People say, oh, you can love each other if you're starving, and it's like it gets awfully hard.
No, right.
And then the kids come, and you have all the money pressures. It's really tough. So, but yeah, respecting traditions is
good as long as they don't hurt.
Exactly. Yeah. Like poor Bhavana, she was abused. She was taken advantage because of her dowry. He just married her for the money. He had no interest in her. He already had mistresses, and he just kept going with the mistresses. And it was interesting because she had a girl baby. He didn't want the girl baby, but the mistress had a boy baby. But because the child was, I hate that term, bastard, but that they. So that poor little boy was nothing because his parents weren't married. They were he was just the child of this mistress. And it's just the movies like The Duchess, stories like that in European culture where it's just such an emphasis on got to have the male heir, and women are nothing, the men rule. It's really pretty much in every society. It's really important to keep that in focus. And even in modern times, America, women make 80% of what men make in America, and women who do the same job. So we don't have some of these other things, but there's still quite a bit of inequality in the work that we do and how we're valued. Women who stay home are constantly undervalued. Oh, that's all you do. They're raising their children. That's not enough.
Even women. I was having tea with a group of women, and there was a 70-ish woman from India. And she told me, my niece makes more money than her husband. And she was shocked, and I almost got the feeling that she did not approve of it. Why shouldn't she make more money?
It's not natural.
But he's the husband, and he has to make more money. And so I didn't want to argue with her, but
No,
that's the attitude generally. Even here. And I find that very interesting.
No, or even just older people. My husband has an aunt who thinks that life has really kind of gone downhill in America, and I'm like, well, maybe if you she grew up in a world where everything was for the white men. And to think of white Protestant men. And things have changed, and now we're incorporating all these other people in the mix, the diversity, and with that becomes the strength. Maybe it was more civil to you, but you didn't like the music that was out there or the way people dressed or whatever, but there was a lot of inequality going on, as we know, for everyone.
And you see, human nature is the same, whether it's Parvati in Bombay or Patricia in New York, it's the same thing.
It's so true. And people just think, oh, that's just the way they do it. And it's like, well, we have a really ugly history too.
Oh, yes.
And even now, people still.
And realizing that is the first step.
Yes,
I think to change things. Yes, so true.
Yes, that this is not an ethic, having to do with someone's ethnicity or religion. That it's just the way the society, as you've been saying, or the community behaves with the people that are there, and also the leadership too. It depends on who's in charge.
Oh, yes.
And if it's a more genteel, we saw that with the Romans, who was more a genteel emperor, things were a little nicer for the people that lived there, but they were awful and, lots of slayings and war, conflicts and so forth. Things were bad. So
things were bad. Yes.
It's important to keep that in mind. So.
Yes, very important to keep that in mind.
Yes. Well, thank you, Annu. This has been delightful. And
thank you, Holly.
The best of luck with your publishing and with your students and teaching. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this opportunity.
You're very welcome.